see the titles, you recognize that this movie was made in 1979, and it's much slower than movies now in 2018. The long pauses that Landis takes on the architecture, the angle on the building, those things were of interest to him, and he had final cut, so he didn't have to change it. But they're long. I love John, but those opening pieces are long. And that smoky Chicago's industrial at the beginning takes forever. And we stop at the Joliet Correctional Center sign. Cut. As we're walking John Belushi out of his cell, a couple of things come to mind. Again, the fact that it's 1979, because it looks to my 2018 eyes very slow, way too long. Give me the scissors, let me cut it. That's number one. And number two, I was John's age then, and we were, oddly enough, because I was a behind-the-scenes guy that had known him for a while, so we could be close and there was no fawning or nonsense, I knew him. And I knew that there, as big a star as he was, there were things he didn't know, like he got us a screening of the movie that gave him the idea of the bee for the character he played, the Bumblebee in Saturday Night Live. So he invited us to come and see this at night. And his assistant got a room. Now, there's all kinds of screening rooms with projectors at Universal. Some of them are editor workrooms where you don't bring movie stars and their family or friends. It's where sound editors go to look at a black and white dirty dupe to lay in music and sound effects. And they look just like that. And when he walked into the room, when John Belushi walked into the room, and I'm telling you all this, it's relevant. You should be stopped at this point watching John and two guards just about to exit the cell corridor. When John Belushi came into the room that he invited us all in to watch this movie where he got the B character from, you could see the expression on his face that he was embarrassed and felt bad because it was a crappy editor's workroom with the bright neon lights on, and it looked like shit because, it looked like...
What did he expect?
He thought everything would be like what it is when people arrange things for him, but his staff hadn't made movies before. They didn't know how Hollywood worked. They didn't know what a workroom was. They only knew about television, what Lorne Michaels had shown them coming into Saturday Night Live in New York.
You didn't have a green room? Or? No.
There's no green room. There's an actor's trailer.
I see.
But this wasn't a trailer. This was where he's going to show a movie. And so it's normally a small theater. And there's a projector and a projectionist. But because his staff didn't know how to book a screening room has a specific meaning on a motion picture lot, which I recognize is not understood to all. It's a room with theater seats and a projector and a union projectionist, and you can pick up the phone and say roll them like you see in movies, and you can push a button and make it stop, and they can bring in refreshments and other things that are not to be mentioned in family television or YouTube's. And normally it's where you go to say, I'm an important person, and you have your staff who's made many movies because you're an important movie star with many movies behind you, and you have them arrange a suitable setting for your guests. But John didn't know any of that because this was John's first movie. For a lot of us, this was our first big feature, myself included. I'd done The Warriors before this, but I replaced the guy. Another story. The reason I'm telling you all this and the reason this is valuable and relevant, you should be on the shot I'm looking at, which is two guards on their backs and John Belushi walking out the door. Now, remember how many times I've told you this is his first movie? He's a big movie star. He's a big television star. So he got this big movie made. His ass is too big. It doesn't look good in this shot. And no actor who's a star of his caliber would let himself be seen like this. In fact, Warren Beatty would say, you reshoot this scene before I do the next scene, period.
Did he see dailies?
I don't think he knew that he had that kind of power because he didn't understand the system. That's why I'm telling the story.
Because he was a huge TV.
He didn't get the movie made. John Landis and Lorne Michaels made a movie. Lorne said, I can make a movie with these guys. Universal said, I can make a movie with the Blues Brothers because it's very hot. So they got John Landis. John Landis and Danny Akroyd together worked on the script. And they went and made their first movie because they were such big stars. But he was so new at being a big star that he didn't know, hey, John, my ass is too big for you to be on that shot. You should...
They're dollying with him or
Forever. This shot...
The first thing I saw, I didn't say anything.
That's exactly...
It's kind of a, unflattering.
It's extremely unflattering.
He's a funny guy and uses
Because if you look at Woody Allen's first movie, kids, folks, who's ever listening to this, there is a bit where Woody Allen is standing wearing a sport coat, and at the end of the bit, he sticks his hand into a goldfish bowl. He was wearing a sport coat, and the shot you see in the movie, I think it's Bananas, but I'm not sure. The shot you see in the movie, Woody Allen's sport coat sleeve is soaking wet exactly as deep as the fishbowl is before he puts his hand in. It's obviously the second take. They didn't have another sport coat, and Woody Allen wasn't Woody Allen yet, so he couldn't say, we'll do this again after you get sport coat and a new costume designer who doesn't have triples of everything. But he wasn't Woody Allen then. So if you go back and see that movie, you'll see a big movie star being a brand new movie star and shooting stuff where it now looks bad in retrospect. Okay, everything you've seen up until now was us spending a tremendous amount. This is Frank Oz. That'll help make it easier for everybody. Start the take again. This take starts talking about Frank Oz and everything from the last point that led up to this. This is Frank Oz standing at the no smoking in this area sign. And he plays the same part in another John Landis movie that I did with John. And I'll think about it later and we'll place it in here because I can't remember what it is. But when John was trying to think in this other movie I did with him, is there a place in Trading Places where they're panning back the police from the police station? Yeah, Akroyd gets arrested. So I'm in the trailer with Landis. We're talking about Trading Places, and he says, who should I have be the guy to hand back the jewels to Akroyd when he gets out of jail and he's wearing the fur coat and it's all embarrassing for him? And I said, get Frank Oz, because it's the same thing he had in Blues Brothers. Which John thought was a brilliant idea. That was the second time in 15 years working with John I thought I had a brilliant idea. Anyway, this scene that we led up to this is more blinding shoe leather. People getting from A to B and establishing that you're in a prison. But you're dealing with a huge star at the time from Saturday Night Live. If he wasn't huge, a movie this size wouldn't have been made by John because his previous movie was Animal House, which was a very small budget movie at the time, and it happened to make a lot of money when it was released. $88 million in rentals, not box office. That's net back at the studio, and that's a long time ago. So they gave him this movie when Lorne Michaels said, I got two big stars, Dan Akroyd and John Belushi, doing this iconographic Blues Brothers bit. 88 million in rentals. That's the net back at the studio. That's a number you don't hear unless you're inside the studio and the guy in the receipts tells you what the number is. Probably 12 or 13 million dollars back then.
Wow, so that's a 4 or 5.
They took his crane away on the parade at the end of Animal House for a golf tournament.
What?
They took his crane away at the end of the biggest scene in Animal House, the parade at the end where everything goes nuts, for a golf tournament.
Landis didn't have the power.
Landis was not Landis at the time, just like Woody Allen wasn't Woody Allen at the time. And when people want to know where monsters come from, they get treated like shit, and Woody Allen, for the rest of his life, has to look at bananas and see a wet sleeve before it goes in. And that's probably why you don't see bananas on television, and you can't find it, because now he is Woody Allen, and he can say, don't put that on there, I'll turn you into a parking lot. I know people don't like to hear things said that way, but that's my general view of how things work. Power is power. Anyway, we spent a lot of time shooting this shoe leather, and it was attractive, but it was unpleasant because at the end of the day, it's a prison. The one point I want to note is that we had, because it's a feature film, a feature unlike television, you have a standby painter with you all the time, and you have a still photographer with you all the time. You have neither of those with you all the time on a television show. But on a feature, sometimes you get a special still photographer. So you figure, what is it? You got a camera, you got film, you stand there, it's a prison, you point, you shoot, Belushi's in the shot, it's going to look the same. So I saw the contacts of the guy who's our regular, standard, everyday, day in, day out member of the crew still photographer. And then I saw Mary Ellen Mark's contact sheets. And I was not a photo editor, but you could see the difference. The woman had a gift. It was the lens. It was where she stood. It was how she composed. That's why Annie Leibovitz today gets all the stars, because she takes better portraits than anybody. Okay. Anyway, this is ending with, we've been talking about Frank Oz. He's standing there, and now he's going to do and give the stuff to your big surprise. Who's he giving this to? All right.
And just one quick question. The movie was, how long did it take you to break down the movie as first assistant director?
I get hired 2 months, 8 weeks before the start of principal photography, so that includes breaking it down. That's the first thing I do. On a big picture, I take the script, I say hello to everybody, and I go home. And I do it at the dining room table for 2 weeks. And I come back with a schedule and a breakdown and a page count and how long it's going to take to shoot each scene, and a list of what I call the director's interrogatory, which is a spreadsheet that says, for this scene number, here's my question, what's your answer? Because everybody thinks that if you're in Hollywood, you know how to write a screenplay. And even if you do, the guys who really know how to write it still need an assistant director to sit there and say, how many cars, what kind of cars, it's a police car. I had a wardrobe guy once call me, hysterical, on Three Amigos, wanting to know, I got to know how many guys are in the train. I got to know what kind of wardrobe they're wearing. What am I said, look at the shooting schedule. The day we shoot it, those extras are listed by type and count. I got 3 Mexicans in sombreros. I got a guy with a monkey going to Oregon. I got 2 hookers, whatever. And he was all relieved. Even when you tell the crew, sometimes they don't hear it. That's a bitter man speaking. That'll be cut out. That's going to hit the editing room floor. I can hear the thunk now. So we've stopped with Elwood's car in the foreground and the prison. So we've stopped with Elwood's car in the foreground. The prison gates have just opened. And there's the shadow of Jake standing in the bright, shiny light from behind him. Now, the interesting thing was the director and the cameraman and I stood together, and that is the combination that stands together before every shot on every movie from Bisbee to Bangkok. And the director said, I want the doors to open and I want the light to emanate like the light inside the Spielberg spaceship movie. The name escapes me. No, not E.T. The Close Encounters of the Third Kind. John Landis asked the cameraman to make the light appear when the doors opened like Spielberg's Close Encounter of the Third Kind, which was big at the time. So the directors of photography, the cameraman, Stephen Katz, said to John, I don't know how to do that. And I said to Stephen, without thinking, I said, Stephen, why not put up a couple of 20 by 20 white Griffons behind Belushi and put two HMIs or 10Ks or ARCs, whatever we had, I can't remember back then, ARCs I would guess, and bang them in from behind the wall on either side of Belushi, facing away from Belushi, shining the light back at these big white pieces of canvas, shiny white plastic canvas, that would be on frames, 20 foot by 20 foot behind Belushi. So the light would reflect back. And I said to the cameraman, I said, if you work the stop right, the light will overexpose, it'll be too hot, and it'll eat up the negative around the side of the door. And so that's what he did. Now, Katz was too young, and I was too young, and Landis were too young. We were all too young to know how wildly inappropriate that was. Ridley Scott would be shocked, and a cameraman of any standing or experience would be horrified that I had dared to venture into his domain. And most assistant directors would be wise enough now to know that even if they knew the answer, to keep your mouth shut and let the other guy show the director how smart he is. Well, anyway, we were all too young and nobody knew, and I knew there'd be a problem because I knew that Stephen didn't know enough to do a picture this big. So anyhow, that's how we did that shot, and people have remarked about that shot. That is the actual truth of the shot. And we're all too old to sue each other, and nobody gives it anymore, so that's the truth of the shot. I've stopped again at John, his first close-up when you see his face, and the title, White on Blue, John Belushi. My recollection of this shot was that for reasons that I leave to John in history, he was unable to stand still enough for us to get this. So for the first and last time in my life, we put a grip stand behind him and put the knuckle where his medulla oblongata would be, and we helped him stand with that so he couldn't fall over backwards. That is the absolute truth. Now, I got to explain. A grip stand has 3 legs and 2 stands that go up and down, and you put flags and block light and make shadows with them. If you don't have any flag in it, there's this round thing at the top called a knuckle. And the medulla oblongata is where your neck meets where the base of your spine meets the base of your skull. And there's a little pocket back there. You can feel it with your finger. So we had John stand as straight as he could, and then we put the grip stand behind him and put sandbags on it. We extended the stand until the knuckle reached his back of his neck, and he stood in that shot still because that's how we held him up.
Is he supposed to still be in front of that screen?
He's just supposed to be still enough to be able to make this shot be suitable and appropriate. He couldn't stand still.
Okay.
I stopped there. This is where John Belushi just threw out the lighter. I remember that was our first day of principal photography. I remember it was a beautiful day in my shirt sleeves, sitting on the back of the insert car, which we were using to tow them so the scenery would go by in the background. The camera's on what's called a diner tray. Imagine a 50s diner, and they would put a meal on the tray on the side of a car. We had the same thing, and instead of a sandwich, it was a camera, and instead of a diner tray, it was much better construction. And that's how these shots were made. And I remember sitting there and watching us make the shot because I remember it so well that we made it so many times I had to ask the prop man if he had enough lighters, because every time we did the shot, Belushi threw out a lighter, and we kept doing the shot forever. I don't know why, just people getting used to people. And we actually had a kid run along behind and pick up lighters and give them back to the prop guy. If you look carefully I stopped after they did the jump over the bridge. If you look carefully, that really was the 95th Street Bridge in Chicago. Where the raised bridge meets the street, there is a black strip. We had the bridge set, open, at a fixed distance. We had that join where the end of the bridge meets the street paved, and then second unit was able to do a jump and launch it over the bridge, and then he would land. When the car landed on this side, it wouldn't hit such a steep angle. It was smoothed out by the paving that was done. The fact is, I can't remember. It's so long ago. I don't think, no, we didn't have a bridge as a miniature. The only bridge we had was for the police car leaping across the broken bridge, but that hasn't come up yet. This is a different bridge. So that was a real car, and that was a real stunt group, and that would have been Eddie Dono was John Belushi's guy, and Dan Akroyd's guy was Tommy Huff, who has since passed. Wonderful stuntman. And the two of them doubled John and Danny, or the boys as we called them, and they were able to go out on second unit when we didn't have the real John and Danny and just drive that well and actually make the leap when the bridge was that far open. But it's a sequence of shots. You have to string the shots together and do tricks to make it work. But still, somebody had to leap over the bridge with a car. Contrary to my previous remarks about the slowness of the movie, that was a very nice cut after he says, fix the cigarette lighter, and then you cut to that big boat coming through. It has a leisurely pace to it, and then you see the run by, and it's leisurely. And then you pan with the car right to left as the police car is going by. That's called a motivated pan. And you end up on an establishing shot with the Sears Tower clearly showing the boys have come to Chicago. And it's very nicely done. It's nice planning, it's nice photography, it's nice editing. George Folsey was a wonderful editor. The alley that they turned into is obviously an unusual looking, coming off the freeway. It was an unusual looking exit. So it was unique. It's very well known. That alley and those buildings are very well known. My father had driven past that corner for the better part of 30 years. And he said to me one day, hey, I don't even know what corner it was, but he knew. 22nd and Wood, they're building a big building at the end of the street. I never saw construction go up so fast. And I had said, Dad, that's our building. That's the fake church. That's just a false front. And that was the quality and a testimony to the production designer, who is John Lloyd, and he's passed away. And John could build a church quickly and cheaply and fool my father into thinking that that was a real building and been there for a long time and he didn't recognize it, or they were building it. I can't remember, but he was very surprised that there was a church there, and he'd driven by the corner so many times. And when you come up close on the orphanage, the St. Helen of the Blessed Shroud orphanage, and you see all that brick, one way it's able to go up so fast is that brick is as real, it says on the blueprint. It's plastic, and it comes in sheets. They make so much of it, and it's glued to lumber. So it's actually a false front lumber with enough detail that it actually looked like that kind of church, and the right size windows and the whole everything, because that's the kind of guy John Lloyd was. If you look at that, you would believe that was a real old orphanage, and that's what they looked like. Because I swear to God, he must have found a picture of 50 of them and found all the best features, and that looks like an orphanage, and it's made out of wood and plastic. The shot going up the stairs inside the orphanage with John and Danny is a very wide-angle shot. a lot of this movie was shot with a 14 millimeter lens, which is a very wide lens. Most movies are shot with a 40 millimeter lens. That was the size that Mr. Hitchcock said was the closest to the eye, and it's a whole long story. A 14 is very wide. And so it exaggerates the apparent distance of things. And I say this because at the end, this scene ends with a very scary scene. At least it was scary to us. We said this is the scariest scene in the whole movie, this shot. Because we did this after we had come back from Chicago. We did all the exteriors, which you haven't seen yet, before we shot this, because we had to get out of Chicago before the winter came. So that's why this was built. Okay. I stopped where John Belushi has fallen to the floor in the desk after he's fallen down the stairs. But that wasn't John falling down the stairs. That was his stunt double, Eddie Dono. And all of us on the movie said that is going to be the most dangerous stunt because it was exactly what you saw. It was a guy sitting in a kid's desk chair made out of balsa wood and plastic so he wouldn't kill himself, rolling down the stairs and hoping that he wouldn't break his neck on the way down. So I wouldn't do that for a living. The church, they went to church to get redemption. It was a real church in Chicago. When you go inside, the women in the hats and the guys standing in front of the well-lit cathedral windows are on the stage. And those are all serious dancers, which you will see shortly. And yet, even though we had them on the clock, and dancers aren't cheap, and we had a bunch of them, Aretha Franklin came in, as was scheduled, while we were shooting this, and she was only in for 2 days, and then she was going to Japan. So we had 2 days to shoot Aretha Franklin, even though we weren't finished with the church. So we put the church... We shot as much of the church as we could. We hot-locked it. That is to say, we had a list of people who were allowed to come back onto the stage. And otherwise, you had to call the production office. And we kept all the dancers on their pay rate, so they made 4 days out of a 2-day job. And that was what we did to... They made 6 days out of a 2-day job, and that's what we did to get out of... Aretha jail. There were 2 moments in my career that were very exceptional. I've paused at James Brown standing at the microphone. The first moment was when Newt Arnold asked me to replace him a second time. That's only meaningful to other assistant directors, but Newt Arnold was the best of the best. And the second moment was when James Brown turned to me at one point and he said, "I like the way you do this. You don't let 'em mess." And I found out later that he was a strict taskmaster with his own group and didn't waste time with studio musicians on double scale in the recording studio and so on. He was a very, very interesting guy. Very interesting guy. Just a quick note, Deborah Nadulman was the costume designer. And if you look at the wardrobe on the dancers and the extras in the church and in the choir, it's really quite spectacular. It's really nicely done. It's pastel. It's church Sunday. It's the most gorgeous choir outfit I've ever seen. Not that I have a lot of choir outfit observation experience, but it does look very impressive. Everything I ever did with her was terrific, and she wrote a great book called Dressed, and she is now the chair of the costume department at USC, and everything Deborah has ever done and does is quite amazing. My hat's always off to her. I just stopped at the church exterior when God himself is appearing through the sunlight, appearing on the church. And that is a locked off shot because it's a matte painting. And what that means is the camera is locked for horizontal panning and vertical tilting so that a matte, a black, solid, opaque covering can be laid over various parts of the negative, and a painting can be introduced into the negative. The rays of the sunlight that you see painting on the church, the luminance of the signage on the church, and probably the way the sky looks is probably been enhanced by Sid Dutton and Illusion Arts. I don't know if they even exist anymore, but at the time they were the best absolute Albert Whitlock pure film matte painters. That was how it was done when we did everything on celluloid with silver acetate particles. Now it's all digital and you do it in Photoshop. But that was then, and that's what we did to make a shot that looked like that. The other thing I want to point out is that's Chaka Khan. When you see the close-up, the waist figure of the pretty girl in the choir robe singing, that's Chaka Khan. A very young Chaka Khan.
Hey, I just had a question. That dance number seemed pretty immense. I mean, there were, at least a dozen female dancers, probably a dozen male dancers. I mean, how long did it take, not only to break it down, but actually to rehearse all of that?
Well, we get the dancers rehearsed. In other words, the choreographer and the dancers, I wasn't part of that conversation because I didn't need to be, booked it with the production manager, the producer, whoever, and they said, we've talked to the director, we know what we're going to do, now we got to go rehearse it, and we've got the blueprint, so we'll go to the Debbie Reynolds Dance Studio on Lancashire Boulevard, and we'll tape out the stage. We'll put white tape on the floor of a gymnasium stage, and it's smaller than a gym, and and we'll know where the seats will be for the pews, and we'll know where we can dance, and we'll know how wide that corridor between the two sections of pews are, so we know what the girls have to do when they back up and go forward. In high heels, I would like to point out. It's amazing. I don't know how they do that. Anyway. And similarly, the glow at the end of that church, when the beam of light, when God's will comes through, and then you cut inside the church, and you see that same beam of light coming through the window, and Belushi, only Belushi, not Akroyd, has a glow around him, and you have a well-featured glowing cross in the shot, perfectly framed, you get the idea that John's getting himself some religion. But the glow around John, now remember, this is before Photoshop. This is when you did everything chemically. They had to make another matte. They had to make another Belushi just by himself. They made it as a burn-in, so it would be a glowing image of Belushi, and they would bipack it so that when it ran through the optical printer, you had the original negative and you had these painted in shots, and either what I just described or Sid Dutton painted this around him again to make him glow. That's how we did movie magic when we were doing it with celluloid. Those days are a fond memory. That was a stuntman who was stocky, but probably had on some extra padding to look like Belushi, and who could do those backflips. And that was Belushi dancing. And my recollection is, to this day, I haven't thought about it in 30 years, but to this day I think he was exhausted, near death. He was so tired from just that burst of energy that was required for that. I just stopped at the point where we're in the wide shot in the church on the choir, and the minister is sliding across the stage as only James Brown can do. And I remember distinctly that John and James had a discussion that almost became heated, where John kept saying, okay, now we want to do you doing the duck walk sideways. I didn't do that. No. We saw you do it, James. No, I didn't do that. So that went back and forth for some time, and then finally the shot you just saw. These are amazing, amazing dancers. It's quite a sequence. The trampoline work comes from the fact that John was always interested in kung fu movies. And so we actually set up in the middle of the church. We set up with enough room for safety, trampoline, and real experts, and we put them in church clothes, and they bounced around on the trampoline, and we were able to get some pretty amazing shots. Okay, now a couple of things happened. I'm stopping at the point where we're over Danny onto John in the car at night, going right to left, and there, John just said, we put the band together, we get a couple of gigs. Now, the shot before this, they were coming off the freeway, and that was in Park Ridge, Illinois, which is a town that closes up at 8 o'clock at night. So we became, to shoot that and some other shots, which I'll point out, what's called an attractive nuisance. And so people gathered around and watched us, and the argument is that but not for the movie people, they wouldn't have been there, and the homeowners sued us because Chicago is a litigious city. And they claimed that we attracted so many people that they stood on their flagstones and broke them. They claimed that people came to watch our movie, climbed on their roof, dropped pipes down their roof, and broke the plumbing. They claimed that the husband had just come back from a hospital stay and we had disrupted him and interrupted his healthful recovery. Oh, yeah. Wait till I show you the race down Chicago, and we go past the Mr. Peanut cafeteria. He came out and said we photographed his sign, we violated his copyright, and wanted tens of thousands of dollars for photographing his Mr. Peanut in our movie. Chicago was a very interesting town. But the reason I tell you all this is, after that coming off the bridge, and after John talking about putting the band together, they're driving around. Well, this particular shot was on the back lot at Universal because we had to get out of Chicago because the snow had come on the ground. And we couldn't have done this shot in Chicago without seeing snow. And there's no snow in the movie, but there was snow in Chicago at this time. So we came back here, and there was considerable protestation on John's part because he had this vision of shooting the whole movie in Chicago. But nobody noticed that this is not Chicago because you can't tell. And I'm sure none of you noticed what I'm about to tell you. Watch the shot through the window and count the number of times you see the blue door. I'm stopping now at a picture of the gas station at night, and in the lower right-hand corner, a large sign saying Nelson Funeral Home. And we had made arrangements to photograph the sign. And the guy, the owner, was challenging and finally agreed to make a deal at a very outrageous price that we could photograph his sign because whatever. So he finally makes the deal, and he goes home, and of course he does because it's now 1 o'clock in the morning, and the sign turns off. And we can't shoot because the whole shot's about the sign and the car racing through and seeing the sign. So I call this guy and have the great pleasure of waking him up and making him come back and turn on his goddamn sign because I couldn't, and turn on his sign because we were paying a considerable sum for his bloody sign. This is the shot of John and Danny in the police car pulling around the corner in suburban Chicago with the police cars with the red light behind them, the real police car. And I want to just point out that the trees, the nature of photography, at least back then, was that green trees at night would appear black. And if you look at some of the trees that are not lit, you see they disappear into the blackness of the night. So the only way to see the two trees, I'm looking right over the police car as he's coming around the corner. The only way to see the two trees in the background of the far right of frame is they have lights on the ground pointing up at the trees. Otherwise, they would disappear. Same with the tree just to the screen left of the camera of the police car with the red lights, and the tree to the left of it, and the tree in the background behind the two of them, which is brighter than the other two. The only way you see trees is if we light them. Ask yourself, where is that light coming from? It's coming from 728 from the electric department. This is, the SCMOD is a plasma display, which in 1979, when it says Blues, Elwood, that was absolute state of the art. In fact, the production yield was so low that they probably got 3 to 6 that they could sell out of every 100 they made. And I think I had a guy there that came with it that wouldn't let us be on the site, on the location without it. So after the boys drive away from the cops and they race around the corner and you see down the street, you see a tremendous number of trees lit. Each tree had a light. Back then the light was called a par can. I don't know what it's called now. And I'm sure that light doesn't exist anymore, but boy, that's a lot of lighting. And of course, we didn't have in 1979 a rigging crew, and we didn't have a cameraman that could tell us that we needed a rigging crew. So we brought the first unit out there, makeup, hair, wardrobe, and the actors stood there while he lit. And this is not the only one of these. But it's a big lighting job, and it looks beautiful. And if we were not quite so young, we would have figured out about rigging crews, but we would have been 10 years ahead of ourselves. Now, today, if you look at a motion picture in the credits, you'll see a grip and electric rigging crew. And typically what would happen, you'd get a lighting setup for a big shot like this, and the grip crew and the electric crew would come out ahead of time on their own a day before you'd get there, and they'd set all the lights, and they'd run all the cable, and they'd test to make sure all the circuits were up and loaded, balanced, and ready to go, and the lights lit, even aimed at the trees. Then the electric crew would come in with the motion picture company, the first unit, and they'd come in an hour ahead of time and go look at the lighting and make what tweaks they had to. And when we were ready, camera ready in an hour. So that was how to make movies, but they didn't do that in 1979. And that's a beautiful piece of driving when the sheriff's car with the red lights flashing slides around the corner and then skids right through the median and back into behind them. That makes it look easy, but that's like ice skating at the Olympics. It looks easy until you put the skates on and try and do it yourself. I got in one of those cars and I gave the stuntman a heart attack when I tried to drive the car 20 miles an hour. It takes a lot of talent to know how to do that and make those cars do those things. And I got one coming up in this movie that'll blow your socks off and nobody's going to believe me. When all the cars slide together and near miss in the middle of the intersection, it is using probably half a dozen stunt drivers, one in every car, and the street is made wet, so it's a little easier to slide. And they rehearse it and can work very well together. And if you notice, if you look up the street, the water stops and the lights keep going. There's you bring a water truck through there and you drop a lot of water where the stunt's going to be, and then he leaves and the stunt guys come in and you shoot. But you don't make the street wet all the way up because nobody looks up there. If you look carefully at the shot after the one I just described, where the two state police are talking and the one guy's on the radio saying we're in pursuit, if you look carefully, you will see that the driver's Mountie hat behind his head has a ghost image. And that's because to make that shot at that time with those lenses and that film, a split diopter was required. It's a lens you put on front of the camera lens, the taking lens, so that the left side, the cop on the radio, has no diopter. So that's like wearing a pair of glasses that don't do any magnification. The guy on the right, again, because a wide lens has a very short depth of field, in order to make him come in focus, the only way to shoot him on a 14 and keep him in focus was to use a diopter, a split diopter, so the right side of the lens had a different focal length than the left side, and thus both would be in focus. There was, at that time, with that film and that lens, no way for both of them to be in focus in that shot. And if you look closely, you'll see the guy in the microphone talking is a little buzzed. But the point is, nobody ever noticed that there's that double hat brim in the back. And you have to stop the film to really notice it, but that's why. The split diopter. Okay, so the Bluesmobile is just pulled into the famous mall. And if you look at all those cars, that mall was empty. The only mall in the history of malldom to ever close. It was in a section of Chicago such that there had been, on 2 successive weekends, 2 successive stabbing fatalities in the bathrooms. So people stopped going to that mall because they were afraid of dying. So the mall closed and the Harvey school system bought it. And John Lloyd and I, the production designer, looked all over for Chicago for a mall. And we found this one. And John said, don't show it to the director because if you do, it'll cost us too much money because he'll fall in love with it. Well, he showed it to the director and he fell in love with it, the director, and it cost us too much money. Those cars were rented from a local Buick dealership. I think it was Buick. And we had PAs and college kids take them and shuttle them from the dealership to park them in the parking lot because there were no customers in the parking lot, because nobody went there because they didn't want to get stabbed. And if you look again at this same shot where the Bluesmobile is just turned in, if you look carefully, you'll see that the building looks like a Hallmark card. It's all white and it's all lit up. And if you look carefully, you'll see there's vertical pillars of white light along the side of the building. Those pillars are made by taking a par light, which emanates a cone, pointing it up vertically, and moving it close enough to the wall so that the planar surface of the wall vertically intersects the cone emanated by the parabola, so that the planar surface of the wall intersects vertically and coaxially with the cone emitted as light by the par can, but turned into a parabola mathematically by that coaxial planar intersection of the conic light beam. And if one of those is set next to each pilaster, you get that Hallmark card. But it took half the night to set that with the whole company. And again, because it was 1979 and we didn't know as much about making movies as we did 20 years later, we didn't have an electric crew who should have at least put the cans in position, turned them on, seen if it, and hooked them up and seen if it generated a proper, in fact, the fifth one from the left is tipped and generated a proper parabola. It was it was a very interesting evening, and you're about to see a really wonderful stunt coming up shortly. I want to point out that that's Stephen Bishop, the singer, in the second police car. And now I've stopped at the point where Danny has said, you want to get us out of this parking lot? Okay. And now he's going to drive through the window into the mall for the famous mall sequence in Blues Brothers. So I asked Eddie Dano and Tommy Huff, the stuntmen for Belushi and Akroyd, respectively, and I said, how are you going to calculate the physics of this? And how fast are you going to go? And how do you know how much suspension give there is in this vehicle? And he said something like, well, we got a little ramp with a kicker on it, and we had boys tighten up the suspension some, and we figure we hit it about 55. We ought to do fine. A kicker ramp is a little wooden ramp that's tipped up in the air, but at the end of it, there's an extra 6 inches to a foot, an extra 6 inches maybe, of a bump out of wood or steel. So it gives a last kick to elevate the car. And if you hit it right and have a good feeling for it, you can do some amazing things with an automobile. But don't try this at home. And these are guys, not only was it a closed course, but these were the real creme de la creme of stunt guys. They were good at everything, those two. Inside the store, the pretty girl says, do you have anything else? And the guy says, yes, do you have a Miss Piggy? That was Gary McClarty. Gary was the stunt gaffer, the guy who choreographs and designs all the stunts. And Gary told John and I, before we would do any of the car stunts, what was going to happen. And the whole time, and it's unfortunate I can't give you an imitation of it because it requires hand movements that vary between where the camera is going to be and where the thing you're photographing is going to be, and you never know when it's changing. But he would explain it, and John and I would look at each other and shrug, and I would show Gary the lockup, and he said, yeah, that's it. And I'd get out of the way. We'd turn on the cameras and stand back and watch with everybody else what was going to happen, because he was a great stuntman and a great stunt driver and the best side hack man in the business. That's a guy who drives a motorcycle with a sidecar guy on it. That's a real skill, and it's very unusual, and he was the best there was. But you couldn't understand Gary telling you how to open a can of pickles. Love the guy, but you couldn't understand it. And look at the stunt lady on the left of the screen in the red top with the dark hair and the white pants. Watch the stunt that follows as the car comes bursting through the door and see how she almost gets killed. As I stood there and watched it, I thought if she was another eighth of a second slower, she would have eaten it. There's just no question about it. That's how close it was. And the other thing is, when you see how destroyed the store is, the set dresser, we had a separate set dresser for this mall, which you will see. I've never been on a movie with two set dressers, and I've been on lots of big movies. We had a set dresser for the rest of the movie, and we had a set dresser for this mall. So everything you see wasn't there when we found the mall. So she would call up a real retail company and say, I'll pay you money, you get me a store full of shit, and I'll put it in the store. A store full of stuff, and I'll put it in the store. And then she and her set dressers would dress this store and every other store you saw. But for some reason, they hired a guard company to make sure the crew didn't take any gum. So the guards are watching us like we're criminal, we're felons. And then, of course, we do the first stunt, and the guards realize there's nothing to protect. They're turning it all into toothpicks. And by the way, those guards and that guard company, which I shall not ever name or mention, burns. It would burn me if I were to burn that guard company by mentioning their name. So I won't, because I don't want to burn anybody. But the guard company that shall remain nameless, especially if the editor can find his way to the scissors, they actually, the guards turned out to be cohabitating in the guard shack in the back because we had to protect all this mall set dressing. Set dressing is anything inside the walls that the actors don't touch and say, here's the map that shows the treasure. So all those balloons and boxes and so on, that's the set dressers. And you'll see pianos and endless amounts of stuff. She got all that. It was Frankenheimer's daughter. Okay, that's all I got for that. Now, the first time you see the wide shot of the Bluesmobile coming at the camera from far upstage, chased by the two police cars, you see the forward part of the frame filled with people. Now, in order to do this safely and not injure anybody, you put stunt people where the stunt gaffer tells you, which is close to the car, and then you get extras who get hired as a condition of employment to work next to the vehicle like this, and you coordinate it at quarter speed, then half speed, then full speed, and they see exactly when they have to get out of the way compared to where the car is. They're confident, safe. If anybody looks like they'll fall, you take them out of the crowd, and then you can do a shot like this without killing anybody. If you don't do it like that, you hurt somebody. The other thing I'd like to point out is that you have to please remember this box was empty, closed, isolated. They weren't paying the electric company for power anymore. So, in addition to having a second set dresser, we had a second gaffer who brought in this. Remember, this is before there was a rigging gaffer. This was too big for a rigging gaffer on the first unit. This was its own unit, the mall unit. And every one of those dots of orange light that you see represent a light with cable run to it and power source to it and orange drape hung around it so that we had something that looked like a decorated mall at some reasonable price. That's also what the set dressers did. We never paid any attention to it, but I know it wasn't there when it was an empty, used-to-be mall bought by the school that didn't know what to do with it. So they were happy to let us have it and tear the hell out of it. This is the shot where the car drives through two windows, and we broke a lot of glass in this place, and we knew we were going to break a lot of glass. And at one point, I've made movies for 30 years, and I never had this opportunity except on this picture. We stood there and couldn't make a shot because we could see our own light bouncing back into the window that we were shooting. And so nobody could figure it out because it was a triple kick and we were all standing there arguing which light of the many lights it was. So I said to the key grip, I said, give me a hammer. He gave me a hammer and I threw it through the window. And the window shattered and the problem went away. And I said, okay, let's get ready. We're rolling. You normally can't do that, but that's what I was able to do in this particular situation because the windows were being broken anyway as part of principal photography. So now it's the end of the car chase in the mall, and John Landis, the driver, and Stephen Bishop, the passenger, are upside down in their second sheriff's vehicle. And in order to get this shot of them spinning around slowly, we had to get the whole crew to help us push the car and turn it around and get it spinning. I remember that warmly. I say the whole crew is probably 8 guys in craft service. But anyway, we turned the car around and they made a funny shot. Okay, Princess Leia has just arrived and she's going to take some action. But we panned down to her from the tracks of the Lake Street L. And the boys will be in the room later, and you'll see something that is possible only because it can happen in the loop. So I'll show it to you in just a moment. The makeup man, I'm sorry, start again. The funny-looking bald guy who asked for the cheese whiz was our makeup man, Shotgun Britain. And he's been around since movies have been around. And he told us that we were making a road picture with Crosby and Hope again, with John and Danny. And he was a great guy, and we all miss him. What's coming up is a constant stream of railroad cars out in front of the windows that you see from the hotel room. And the hotel room was selected so it faced a train track in the loop, which has two adjacent tracks. They're parallel. So I got two sets of trains, one-car trains, two-car trains, I don't even remember, and we had a motorman, two-car train. We had a motorman at each end and a production assistant at each end in both cars. And they would pass, the car would run in one direction, pass the window, turn off the power for the direction he was going, radio back to the guy at the other end, turn on the power for the direction the other way, and start the train going backwards. The equivalent of putting a car in reverse, but you can't do that with a train, so you have to do that lengthy thing I just described. And by having two of them and working out the sequence, you see what you see in the shot now. Now, I'm frozen on the shot of the hotel where John and Danny were staying, getting blown up. This was actually a very interesting proposition. What you see there is not a hotel being blown up. What you see is a photograph of the hotel being manipulated around the rest of the picture that you're looking at, and an animated image being created by clever people. If you look very carefully at the steel pillar in front of the police car, and you look at the right edge of it, you can see a thick black line between the edge of the pole and the flame to its right. It's the pole that runs up behind the police car, the sheriff's car. That thick line is a matte line. And that's how what you see behind that pole was created. That's some artwork that is visible if you stop and hold it like this. The reason we had to do this was we made a deal to blow up a building for this shot, and the bank said, you can blow up our building if you return the empty lot to us as a clean and vacant lot. In other words, we paid them a price to photograph the building and then to hire a demolition company to sweep the place out. Bad deal, but we made it. And it was made not through the legal office, but through the location department and the producer in Chicago. So then we go out to find somebody who'll let us blow up a building in Chicago. And they don't do explosive demolition in Chicago. And there was a long story, and it was one of two possible outcomes. Either they didn't have miles and miles of pipe with gas in it properly marked, as they claimed, and if we blew up a building, we could blow up half of Chicago, or the mayor's brother-in-law ran a ball and chain wrecking company and didn't want to show the world how fast explosive demolition was. But for either reason, we were blocked from doing what we'd said. So we go back to the bank and said, we want our money back. We can't blow up the building. And the bank said, go to other banks, go to hell. I was trying to be funny and it didn't work. And you owe us a clean and vacant lot. You paid us. That was the obligation you took on for giving us the money. That's an odd way to write a contract, but that's what they signed. And the consequence was we had to sue them. And when I came back to Los Angeles at the end of the picture, I became the production manager for a couple of weeks. and mostly got all the paperwork together and gave it to the legal department at Universal, who took it from us and said, okay, we'll handle it, and the lawsuits related to other Chicago activities, we will handle it all. And I never found out what happened. But what you see in front of you is an extremely artfully made panic solution, because that's a frame off a slate before the slate showed up. The camera was rolling. The guy hadn't put the slate in. We had an extra frame. John Lloyd and Albert Whitlock and Illusion Arts took that, put it together, and made what you see here. Movie magic before digital. Okay, the wreck that happens inside after she fires the rocket was done by having what are called dump boxes. They're large, empty wooden crates with no top and a bottom that's split down the middle and hinged on the ends. So when you pull a trigger, the box opens up and whatever's inside falls out. And we had rigged, this was stage 19, we had it rigged for a long time, took forever. And we got all set to do the shot, and we found out afterwards that the mechanical effects department didn't like us because we were young, I guess. Anyway, they rigged the dump boxes with, instead of small chunks that had structural integrity, like a piano stool, so it doesn't fall out of the box because it's not small enough and it withstands the downward pressure and stuff doesn't fall out of the box. Now, I ran this particular shot from up in the scaffolding. It's like 10 feet above the stage, so I could make sure everybody was out of the way and wasn't going to get anything falling on them. And I was with one of the effects guys, and we were right next to one of the boxes. And it was Leo, who you'll hear about later, Leo Salas. And he was leaning out the scaffolding and kicking the box, trying to get stuff to fall, because the old guys on the mechanical effects at Universal didn't like us and wanted to screw up the gag. And it took several guys a week or more to get this set ready. It was, there were some ugly moments in Hollywood in the background. More later. Okay, couple of things. That was in the hotel interior with Murph and the Magic Tones. That was John Belushi's last shot in the movie. And if you listen carefully, you can hear a very different sound in his voice than the sound you heard in the police car when he threw the cigarette lighter out of the car. That was his first scene in the movie. It was 1979-80, and, well, I leave the rest to you. He was a wonderful guy. Then the next shot you see is a car doing a 180 and sliding into a perfect parking position. And I had a bunch of police cars and cars for him to bang into lined up because I thought this would be 5 takes, 10 takes. And Tommy Huff, who he wasn't even primarily a stunt driver, he was just a great stunt man. He threw that in on the first take. Unbelievable. Inside the restaurant Chez Paul, which was a very fancy place when I was in Chicago as a kid, that was Pee Wee Herman as a bit player, lucky to be working before he invented the voice. And that's all I got to say about that. This was the Nazis and the actor. This was the Nazis and the actor, whose name just went out of my head, was very uncomfortable with making Nazi hate speech. Remember, this is 1979, so there was considerable different time than it is now. But back then he was playing a part, and he didn't want to say the words without telling the extras that those weren't his genuine feelings, which I doubt anybody thought. That was Roosevelt Road, to the best of my recollection, and that was John Lee Hooker. And we have some of the greatest black music that's come out of the last 20, 30 years in America, right here in this movie. That was Maxwell Street, and it was a very wonderful day, lovely day, and as you see the boys walking into the Soul Food Cafe, if you notice, there was flashing, blinking neon. And that is in Chicago on Maxwell Street. And when they go inside, that's on the stage at Universal. So we had to have matching soul food flashing neon that was somewhat acting as if it was broken. And inside will be Aretha Franklin and her backup singers, and Matt Guitar Murphy and Lou Marini. And that's what comes up after this, and you'll see the sign match. And it's also that set that you'll see inside is below the street level because they walk down. Well, on the stage, there's no below, so what you do is you have what happens out the window be above them so that the inside of the set is lower. So we made a section of parallels and put some dance floor down, and we had a place for the extras to be outside the window. So that was 2 days' work in the Soul Food Cafe with Aretha, and those are the only 2 days she's in the movie, and she didn't talk to anybody but Landis, and she had about 8, 9 people with her, and it was exactly what you saw. Now, I'm going to tell a story here where I'm sure they're going to cut it out because it's very inside. But in this set, we were about to switch lenses in the very last shot of the day. And I told the guy not to change lenses because it would put us, the whole company, in meal penalty because that was a new union rule. No, because it made a new setup and it was after dinner hour and therefore it constituted you couldn't take the 12-minute extension. So I would have had to pay $7.50 times 100 guys. So meal penalty tends to annoy production people and they didn't want to do it. So I said to the kid, don't change the lens. He said, that's not a new setup. I said, yes, it is. Well, anyway, they changed the lens. I asked the legal department and they said, it's not ratified as law yet. How do you even know about it? I said, I was in the camera department. I saw it hanging on the wall. So the guy says, well, if you knew about it, then your company has to obey it, even though no other company has to, and the lens change costs you a meal penalty. That's studio legal. And then years later, the guy called to ask me to testify in something else. I was busy that day. So there's two things. We're in Ray's music shop, and he starts playing on the piano. Now, for reasons that I can't recall, his cord to run the electric piano, that was his electric piano, wasn't correct, wouldn't plug in, and we were late, and it was time to go, so I had the electrician split the wire, and I got down on my hands and knees and ran the set and plugged bare wire, holding just the shielded part, and plugged the bare wire against the input for the power in Ray Charles' electric piano, and I'm down on the floor for this whole song, keeping the piano running. At the same time, but obviously very different time, the exterior took place on 47th Street in Chicago, and it was colder than things I'm not allowed to say on a family television show. And it was very cold, but the dancers gave it their all, and this is a great number, always has been. At the Howard Johnson's, when they go to make a phone call with a phone booth conveniently placed next to a propane tank, Princess Leia is able to come up and throw a tow missile at it, or the longest flamethrower I ever saw, and it blows up. And we did it at an actual Illinois thruway Howard Johnson's, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, but we had to make a big explosion, and we had to have extra cars in the shot. So we couldn't have real cars on the freeway because people would freak out. So this simple thing of seeing the explosion at that particular location became very complicated. We had to coordinate it with a lot of highway patrol or state police, and we had to lock up the real traffic so people wouldn't have a heart attack. Then we had to put our traffic out on the road, run them, make the circuit hot, roll the camera, shoot the thing, and blow it up, and then release the cars and let the real traffic back in. It was not an easy thing to do. That's the fun of making movies. Bob's Country Bunker is on the Universal back lot, or was at the time, and of course that's all our neon, and it was just a bunker. And then that's the lake, the lagoon up at the front, and there used to be a submarine that went in there. And there's a shot that happens later where I had to, I'll tell you about it when that shot comes. Anyway, some television show before Blues Brothers was released in the theaters came up to shoot this location, Bob's Country Bunker, to get a free location on their TV show. And it would have been on screens and spoiled before the audience saw it in the theater. So Landis and I went up there one day and busted the signage so the TV company couldn't shoot. I'm surprised they didn't fire both of us. Okay, now they're in Griffith Park, and you'll notice that the streets are wet, and the purpose of the streets being wet is so that you can see the reflection of the headlight. When you're shooting at night, it just looks better. So we have a water truck, a 2 or a 4,000 gallon truck, and it drives along and has nozzles on all the sides and front and back, and the guys are very talented and can put water anywhere as they drive down the yellow line. And of course, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, so we have this to ourselves. So that's how you do shots that you're going to see coming up very shortly. And notice how many trees we have to light. Okay, the poster that he does a close-up on, "See You Next Wednesday," is a standard poster title referenced in all of John Landis's movies that I can remember, certainly all the ones I've worked on. I'm just pointing that out because it's an inside joke. At the end of the Maurice Line scene in the steam bath, which of course wasn't really a steam bath, we had the band in there for the last shot. But if you look very carefully, in the upper right-hand corner with the famous poker player half hat, whatever that thing is called, green visor, that's not Willie, Too Tall, Too Big, whatever his name is. That's my trainee assistant director. I can't remember, but we didn't have the actor that day. And that was the only black guy roughly of the size that we could put the hat on and make all the way up on the right, the drummer. It's not really that guy, that's my trainee. Okay. And so just wanted to tell you that. Some of you may not recognize the girl in the car that pulls up to the gas station at night while they're waiting for the tanker truck, but that's Twiggy. And there was a period of time where TWIGGI was the hottest, most famous thing there was. It didn't last long, but most of you probably weren't born when she was hot like that. This is the Palladium Hotel. We have about several hundred extras, 800, I can't remember. We built that stage extension. It's called a thrust. The interesting thing about this is 1979, and at the end of the fourth day, the producers came up to me and said, "What do we do? We're not finished, and we need another 1,000 extras tomorrow." So I said, "Go on KROQ and advertise." And then I said, "You better get extra cops and extra assistant directors because you're going to be taking knives and chains off of people because you're bringing people in off the street." And they did. And they were up in the bathroom, and they were setting the paper towel dispensers on fire. And that was because when I asked them, they said, well, the cops won't let us smoke dope. Now, this is 1979, but people have been smoking weed since, never mind. So I asked the head of the cops, could I please let them, if they were chill about it, could they smoke dope in the bathroom and they wouldn't set the towels on fire? And the cop said, fine. So I made the announcement, and the crowd went wild, and I could have run for mayor, and they would have elected me right then and there. And then some months later, I was in the train station, and I saw those same policemen happen to see me, and they told the person I was with that that was the greatest thing they'd ever seen in the world because I was able to bring the crowd under control. So that just tells you that weed is the answer to everything. This is too inside to make it to the end of this tape, but just so you know, when John Candy picks up the phone and says, get me troopers Daniel and Mount, he was talking about Sean Daniel, who was an executive at Universal, who worked for Tom Mount, who was the senior executive for development under Ned Tannen. That whole regime is all history. It's like talking about Lord Byron. But at the time, that's what those two names meant. So that was the gas station that just exploded, and we had built that as a small balsa wood shack, barely populated with anything. We shot the scene with Twiggy. Then we came back the next night. This was the first shot of that night. And the gas station had two 55-gallon drums with gasoline in it. And inside the drums were 2 sticks of dynamite each. So when we did this shot, we got everybody behind our big 40-foot trucks. A lot of people were in the truck, I remember. And then I said to the cops, have you checked the back? Have you checked in the woods behind where the house is going to explode? And they said they had, and I said, I got a weird feeling. Would you guys mind? Would you check again? Just make sure there's nobody hanging out. So they went back, and sure enough, they found kids hanging out in trees to watch what we were doing. And they didn't know because they were kids, and they snuck up. They didn't know this thing was going to blow up, and the cops thought it was clear. So if I hadn't had that tingle in the back of my neck and said to the cops, I know you checked, would you check again, please? We would have blown up some kids.
Wow.
And there would have been, it could have been real, real serious. So the concussion on this thing was astonishing. And when the gasoline truck blows up, the way that was done is the way you make a car flip. You put a cannon and a phone pole, a cut-off piece of a phone pole, and you blast it out the bottom, and it lifts up and flips the car. And that works if you put it in the trunk of the car or the front of the car, and you tow the car and then set it off. Well, we had 4 of them in that gasoline truck, and it lifted the truck, but it didn't flip it. So John was not happy because he never got what he wanted on that particular shot, but it was very short. The shot inside the auditorium when everybody's waiting and they're clapping, it's interesting when you explain to the crowd what you want and you have a mic where they can all hear you and you tell them that these are important shots and they'll see themselves in the movie. You can get them to all worked up into a frenzy and do it with hand signals. And that's what this is. And that's really the one thing that assistant directors do that you actually see on the screen. For anybody who watches this who is older than I'm surprised you're still here. But that being the case, you and you alone will remember, while the rest of us are not familiar with this. That is the world-famous Cab Calloway, and he is doing a magical rendition from when they were behind the curtain in street clothes. Now they're all dressed up, and he's doing his famous song, Minnie the Moocher, and it's a wonderful thing to behold. In this shot that we're showing you, this is over a full house onto the fully dressed band. This is a very, very big set to shoot and a very big set to light. Look at the complexity of covering the crowd in blue light, covering the band on stage in white light, and having pink light in the background against the walls, and all the blue gels up above, and all the hanging chandeliers. There's a lot going on in this shot, and the original gaffer, the chief set electrician, had quit, resigned, been let go for, well, reasons outside the scope of this conversation. And a younger man was in there, and he was faced with this daunting proposition. But here's the interesting thing, so you can understand how movies work. We needed the big shot that you see with all the people and the band in the background. But we had more work to do than we could shoot in the Palladium. So the trick is to do the biggest shots first and always move in wide to tight. And eventually, when we were inside the crowd and we didn't need any extras, we just needed close-up on the band on the stage, we rebuilt the stage on the lot at Universal and were able to extend our time, obviously go over the schedule that we had for the movie, but we were able to get the shots without having another day or two of a few thousand extras. That's clever planning. And again, John Lloyd, rest his soul, if he wasn't such a great production designer, he wouldn't have been able to throw together a duplicate stage that quickly, but he did it, and that's how movies get made. We're doing this again so that you can see that we have the reverse. This is over the band, onto the house. The house is full in the same blue lighting. The band is in the same outfits, and you get all these shots. We had 5 or 6 cameras, I can't remember. You get all these shots with all cameras, and you fill the lens with as many bodies as you can, because if you're paying for all those people, you photograph them. Then after you're done photographing them, if you've planned your day properly, you can go in tighter, like the shot that just preceded this, which was actually this same set on the stage at the Palladium with the white piano and the white outfits and the band all dressed, was duplicated on stage 18 at Universal when we ran out of time and didn't want to keep paying the Palladium location rental and keep paying all the extras when all we needed were close-ups on the stage. So we just packed everything that was on the stage at the Palladium and moved it to a stage on a stage at Universal, and then shot the close-ups. Anytime you see in this piece where all you see is the stuff in the people in white on the stage and no extras, that was at Universal. When you see it full of people, that's at the Palladium. And the way that John and Danny here are dancing in sync to the Cab Calloway song is because the Cab Calloway song was either at the Hollywood Palladium or on stage 18 at Universal. And here, this is in Chicago on the south side around 95th Street, 77th Street, I can't remember. Anyway, it's a very exclusive club from the 20s and 30s that became a place where the Chicago Police Department keeps all their horses for the mounted patrol. That's what this was. But to make John and Danny dance in sync when there's no Cab Calloway here, we have what in movies is called playback. And you get the same track that everybody heard and was clapping to at the Palladium. It's played against playback speakers with an additional guy, because it's a union requirement. And I say playback, and he hits the button, and then you hear this song, and they have been rehearsing with the choreographer. They're now in sync with the same song that Cab Calloway is playing. The magic of editing makes 2 different days appear to be simultaneous. When Carrie Fisher steps out of the tunnel, even though it looks like a different doorway that's facing the boys, she stepped out of the same doorway they stepped out of, because there's only one doorway in the tunnel. And by cheating the reverses and pointing the camera in a different direction, too long to explain here. You can make it look like there's two doors, and there was a door for them and a door for her, and you make it work out of one tunnel. The tunnel is much shorter than it appears on screen. This tunnel is built in forced perspective. So when the boys walk forward to camera, to the position you're looking at as an audience, they're walking into a man-sized tunnel. But the tunnel that's behind them with the lights actually is much shorter and reduces down to a dime-sized hole in the back. And that forced perspective makes a tunnel that's 8 feet or 10 feet long look like it's 40 feet long. And the lights halfway down get to be smaller-sized bulbs to continue to make the effect work. That's what forced perspective is. Okay, you'll notice that there's a large number of police cars. To this day, Mr. Landis and I are in dispute. I've actually forgotten the number. But I believe we bought about 130 vehicles. Now, what happened was we would buy the cars and we would use them 75 or so at a time. And then various pieces of damage would be done, as you're about to see in this scene. And then we would take the cars, put them on a car carrier, take the car carrier to 9th and Throop, which was a bad neighborhood, and we had a garage. And the garage did the work for us and would pound out the bumps and paint the holes, and we would load them back up on the car carrier and bring them back out for the next night of mayhem and destruction.
This is a great intermission with Mr. Green. We're talking about Blues Brothers, 1979, starring James Belushi, Dan Akroyd, directed by John Landis, and AD'd by Mr. Green, a.k.a. other names that we won't discuss on this podcast, but we're having a toast. Cheers. Sante, salud, lacayo. And thank you, Mr. Green, for this podcast, and Mr. Green's wife for hosting us. This has been great. The pizza was awesome, and so were the one or two drinks to keep us going through. Now we have about 65 tracks recorded, and I'm going to put them all together in Final Cut, and we'll get another YouTube series out soon.
We would fly in about 40 stuntmen, 40 stuntmen, every Friday, and we would shoot Saturday and Sunday with the stuntmen and take Monday off, mostly because we were shooting things like this or what you're about to see in some of the bigger shots coming up. And every car in this shot is driven by a stuntman so that we can make it look chaotic, but we don't have an extra in there that loses control, hits the gas, hurts somebody, smashes up a car worse than it has to, catches a car on fire. This is just the Keystone cops banging into each other so that the cops look stupid. No offense to the police who we love and protect and serve us. But this helps make the Blues Brothers look like the rascallions that they are helping the nuns. When I read the script and heard that and read that line, I laughed out loud. I still think it's one of the funniest lines in movies. And this is a great shot when the speaker comes off. Okay, the way you see the bullets in the ground is the mechanical effects. That's different than visual effects, different than Star Wars. The mechanical effects guy takes bullet hits, small packets of gunpowder with electric blasting caps, and places them in a string so it looks like machine guns and buries it in the dirt. Then the car drives along the path as instructed, and there's a nail board operator, a guy connecting electric power to each one of the squibs or bullet hits in the ground by running a battery connected to a nail, running the nail across a run of nails, each one connected to the other end of the bullet hit connected to the battery. So he closes the circuit one bullet head at a time by dragging a nail across a row of nails. It's been that way since silent pictures. And that's how these kinds of shots are made, and that's how war movies are made. Okay, this is a very well-lit back lot at Universal, and you'll see why when you press forward in a second. That's a motorhome, and that house that they're about to crash into is built to be crashed into, so it's largely empty and balsa wood and scored and falls apart. And the water that they're about to go into is the lagoon at Universal. And my good friend Bob Brown was the production manager on this when I was the first AD. And I said, Bob, we got stunt guys in the car to see through the window, and you can see them in the vehicle, and there's wooden spikes in the water. We have to cut it. And Bob says, you can't cut it because those are supposed to be the submarine for the tour, and you can't mess with the tour. I said, Bob, I don't care about the tour. I care about not sticking a wooden pole up a stuntman's, I can't say it on YouTube, when the motorhome crashes into the water and possibly the wooden submarine. So we finally cut it and had to call somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning on tour's executive to let him know the terrible transgression we'd done. It was a broom handle, for Christ's sake. I tell you, the Universal was nuts about the tours. Okay, here comes an interesting shot. This was a shot that John Landis and I did because it was just the extras, and they'd been uniformed, they'd been wardrobed and sent to us this way, and we had some guys to move the police barricades. And so it was just John and I and the camera crew, and we were there at like 5:30 or 6 in the morning to get the sun coming up like that. And I have to say, the only reason I'm telling you about this shot, because it's not very interesting, these were the dumbest extras I'd ever worked with in my life. I tell you something, I couldn't say left and they wouldn't go right. This won't ever end up in the final edit, but these literally were the stupidest human beings in Chicago, and I had them all dressed as cops. It's an embarrassment. This was the actual Chicago Police Department, and that was a Chicago police dispatcher reading, because we needed that voice and we needed that command authority. And this was a fake panel that we built, and it's populated with 24 frame per second television playback, video playback, and it was the way things were done back in the pre-computer days. And we shot these, what are called video plates, what you see on the screen. We had to shoot that so there was something for the screen to play back. This is looking like it's a chase, and I really hope the blue board comes up because I'd love to talk about that. This shows that in Illinois you can do things you can't do in California. In California, Southern California, you can't tie up a freeway. In Illinois, they let us have this piece of freeway. And the way we got it was we made people get off the exit before, and they would drive around a service road and get on the exit after. In the meantime, we would take our 75 extra cars with 75 extras, and we'd have them drive up and down the road as we told them. Well, this worked great for the 2 days we had planned. We had one day where we had the police officers lock up the highway and drive everybody around. On the second day, somebody forgot to order the second day's worth of police officers. So I had 75 cars with fake sheriffs in good-looking fake sheriff outfits, and I had no real police to lock up the freeway. So we called the panic call in, and we called for the police, and I showed the sheriffs, fake sheriff extras, who only drove cars, how to wear their uniform and stand and look with authority, and spread-legged, one hand on the hip, the other hand straight-armed out, palm up, holding traffic, and signaling people off the road and frowning. I taught the extra cops how to do that until I got real cops there to do that, what they were supposed to. So we took over the freeway the second day without legal authority. I'm surprised I am speaking to you from someplace other than a jail cell. We did this a couple of times and it didn't work, and we realized the reason it didn't work was the cars weren't rolling, they weren't flipping, they just slide down the hill. So we all got out with shovels and picks and we dug a ditch so that there was an artificial rapid change in the angle of the slope, which caused the wheels to dig in and flip. That's why when the car rolls, you'll see that they're hitting the ground and the angle of the ground is making them turn. This is Lower Wacker Drive. Chicago is an interesting city. It has a Wacker Drive, which is very fancy and a lot of nice apartments and expensive shops, and people go for walks. And then there's a Lower Wacker Drive, underground, one floor down, and it has delivery and work routes and places for trucks, and it's not meant for regular citizens. But we had it locked off. And for this sequence, I had 100 policemen and 100 production assistants. And I took the assistant director, who was the second unit assistant director, and we drove in a van and we made a map and we marked the units. And I said, this is a cop and this is pedestrian, and you can use a production assistant for it. Because down there, for example, was the Chicago Tribune newspaper trucks, and you can't have a 22-year-old girl production assistant try and tell a newspaper delivery teamster he can't go because we're making a movie. So you need a cop for that. You need a badge. So we'd pick those and we lock the place up, and it would be 5 minutes between when I would say lock it up and I would get back the response that we had a full lockup. And then we would do shots like what you see here. This is towed with an insert car, but there are many, many extra cars behind it, so you can see them in the background through the window. And a couple of times, one time you hear the tire pop or the hitch break, and a couple of times guys thought they were going to get thrown off the back of the insert car when we were doing this. It was scary stuff. Okay, so if you'll recall, I told you we worked Saturdays and Sundays and took Mondays off. And this is one of the reasons why, because they wouldn't let us do this. This is under the Lake Street L. They wouldn't let us do this Monday through Friday. So Saturday and Sunday we could. However, as you can see, there are many cars. And at one point we were doing this, and there was a Bears game in town, and the Bears lost. And the cops told us, okay, we have to stop shooting and we have to move and go find something else to do. And we said, we can't do that. We've got a movie to make. And they said, you don't understand. When the Bears lose and the fans come home, they don't listen to us. They're sure as hell not going to listen to a movie crew. If I were you, I'd move, guys, because they're going to run over you. They're pissed off. So that's one story. The other story is there's a picture of me somewhere standing, because if you'll notice where the crashed cars are, there's shadow. The cars coming up, there's sunlight, but the sun moves. And when it was time to go in and do coverage on this and see guys coming out of cars and so on, the cameraman wanted to move vehicles. So I had to stand on top of the cars and point to the teamsters what tow trucks to hook up, to drag where, to which picture car goes where, to get out of the sun that had moved in the shot. And it's freezing, and the director's sitting in the fabulous Winnebago. There's a wonderful picture of me doing that somewhere. All of these cars were supposed to hit that six-pack of bottles, and all three of them missed them. Honey? I got to do it again because when you're talking, it's coming on the mic. Okay, we're going to go again. All three of these cars were supposed to hit those six-packs and bottles, but they all three missed them. So it was kind of funny. Every time I see it, I see that. In order to do this, to make it leak oil and make smoke, we had a bee smoker. No, actually, this was an electric smoker. It's oil with a plunger, and it's hot, and that heats the oil, and the oil cracks, and it makes smoke. But in order to get the effects man in position to do it, we had to actually strap him onto the bull bar. In order to get the effects man into position to do it, we had to strap him onto the bull bar at the front of the police car with the effects smoke maker, and as the car is driving along and Belushi's hanging out strapped in with a safety belt, squirting, rubbing off the oil, the effects guy's hanging off the front of the car squirting it to make the oil and the smoke. Sometimes when you're making a movie and you're moving quickly, you forget to do things, and I had a lot of things to get ready, and I had forgotten to backscore, to ask the mechanical effects guys to backscore these orange and white blockades. And the car wouldn't bust through as easily as it does without doing that. So I can't remember what I said to the director, but I invented something. And I got the same guy, the little skinny guy that was going out with a porn actress, that effects guy that was hanging off the front of the car making the smoke. He went running out in this shot and with a tree saw and cut the backs in like 4.5 minutes. No wonder he was keeping the porn star happy with that kind of energy. This bridge was in Milwaukee, and we wanted it because it hadn't been finished, and we wanted it for the stunt that you'll see shortly. And this is the only bridge that was available at that time that was far enough along where we could run the Bluesmobile down it and get to the end and do this gag. So along comes the assistant director's worst nightmare, which is the aggressive bureaucrat whose bridge this is his. And he comes up and he says he should have been informed. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And he wasn't informed, and how dare we, and we got no business doing this, and he's not going to say so. He's not going to let us do it. So we're about to walk away from the only bridge in America. So I asked him for his card, and his card is Saul Epstein. So I said, Saul, you're a landsman. That's, for those of you who aren't Jewish, that means you're Jewish. He says, yes. Oh, Saul, thank God. I'm in Milwaukee. I'm dying for corned beef. Where can I get corned beef? You're Jewish? Yeah. Where's corned beef, Saul? He says, listen, you can have the bridge. Now, I could have made the story longer, but that was basically, we got this bridge because I was Jewish and I wanted corned beef in Milwaukee. I still don't think you can get corned beef in Milwaukee. So this is Tommy Huff driving and Eddie riding, the stunt guys. And we told Tommy to take the tires right to the edge because that was scary enough. Tommy, I say it again, and he's passed, was not a car guy. He was an all-around guy, but he was such a good all-around guy that he could do this gag, and he took it an extra tire length and a half to make it hang off the end. We thought we were going to lose him and the car and Eddie, but he knew exactly where it was, and he stopped and he dropped it here. And in the next shot, it's on a wire, so it looks scarier than it really is. Hit me. Okay, so this is, as I mentioned earlier in this is how we flip a car. You get a car where you empty everything out of it. Often you take the motor out, especially when you're flipping it backwards, front over back. Instead of having the weight of the motor to fight, you take it out. You carve a hole in the bottom. You take out the seat, so there's no passenger seat. You carve a hole in the bottom of the floor. You put a tube. We call it a mortar. It's a big, heavy steel tube. And you put a half or a third of a phone pole, which you can see in the shot in the lower right-hand corner, coming out the bottom of the car. With no motor in the front, it pivots on the wheels and flips over in the back, and that's how we get it to go over backwards. The shot that then follows is a miniature, a model of the car made by the effects department, the mechanical effects department, that we launched out of an air cannon. But that's the shot after this. And to get this shot, that the only way to do it at the time, today you do it digitally, but at the time, we drove one car over the other car. The cop car was driven up a ramp and over the top. And I can't remember which, but one of the stuntmen, I think the one in the red car, didn't want to do the gag because he stayed up all night and was convinced he was going to get run into and die on this. So we got another stunt guy to sit in the car. Sometimes that happens. Guys just say, I don't want to do it. I don't feel good about it. This was one of those. So here's the reality of the motion picture business. This is front projection. A car body was suspended on the forks of a forklift that punctured through the screen behind the car that you see the sky on. That's on a stage at Universal, and it was a small stage, and it was front projection, and we paid, I'm not going to say the name of the firm because it's actionable, even though they've been out of business for 20 years, as well they should. We paid them essentially an open check, unlimited time and money. We made this one of the last shots, make it work. Guy says it's all ready to go. It was 2 cameras. They were both VistaVision cameras just to get a better grain structure. And they were water cooled, and he had hoses across the set. And I said, are you ready to go? And he said, yes. And I locked it up, and he turned on the hoses to cool the gates of the projectors, and water all over the stage because some guy had hauled a lumber cart from one side of the stage to the other, didn't pay attention to the hoses. There were no tires on the cart, and he cut the hoses. Didn't know he cut them because it was on the weekend and there was no water running. And on Monday, this guy that I gave unlimited time and money to didn't check to see that the hoses were okay. So we got started. We did this shot. That's how we got this shot. And the great line that comes out of this shot afterwards. The next shot, we got special clearance from the Federal Aviation Commission Administration so we could hang a car, a very light car with the motor taken out, off a helicopter. Normally the FAA gets very excited if you carry load off a helicopter, but this was a helicopter that had a quick release, and we had to mount a camera on the helicopter so it couldn't see the quick release and it couldn't fall off itself, but we could still drop the car. And then we hung it over a pier in some corner of some waterway in Chicago where no people ever went, and we flew up 1,000 feet and put it on a wide lens and dropped it and made that shot, which is coming up. Getting that joke, which I still think is one of the funnier jokes in movies, was the whole reason we hung it off of a forklift to get a projection screen behind it, because you wanted to see those guys falling through the sky to their death when he turns to him and says, well, there's no time left, so here is the hearsay exception. I will give you a dying declaration, and it's admissible because you tell the truth when you're about to die. That's that, and seeing the sky go by, the building go by in the background is what makes it funny. It was worth hanging it off of the forklift. Okay, so that shot was on the back lot at Universal. It was falling through the sky from a helicopter, photographed from another helicopter in front at an angle such that you could see Sears Tower to establish clearly you were in Chicago. But when it hits the ground, we had to have control over how that happened. So this ground is not the same looking ground as what you saw in the straight down shot, but nobody notices that. And when it's hitting the ground here, it is going through a pre-cut hole in the street in the back lot of Universal, which is very simple for us to say, okay, we fill in a piece of paper and nobody drives down that street. Well, we mess it up and cut it and recover the hole so that if you walked on it, you'd fall through. And then we hang the car just above the frame of the camera, just out of the shot, off a crane, and we drop it in a quick release device called a Pelican hook. You can look that up in Wikipedia, and that's how you control dropping things. A Pelican hook is designed to open up quickly with a short tug. So now what's happened is the first bad guys fell into the hole after they acknowledged same-sex Nazism, and the Bluesmobile flew over the hole by running on a ramp, which you didn't see, and these guys drove into the hole, presumably landing on top of the Nazis. That is a nice end to everybody's badness. That is John Landis, the director, who was standing in position where if he didn't move quickly and not stumble, the car would have hit him and hurt him. They don't let directors do that anymore. But John started in the picture business as a stuntman. He went to Elmira, Spain, and worked on westerns. Spaghetti westerns without the spaghetti. They were so cheap. Okay? Okay, so the shot here reminds me of something that I did in my errant youth. I worked in the building to the left of the screen. That was the city hall, and across from it was a lot of computer stuff for city-owned municipality material, railroads and things. And I was a computer geek. And at lunchtime, I came out, and it was the summer, because that was a summer job in college. And so I was there, and there were real Illinois Nazis, and they were marching. So I made some noises. The hell with Illinois Nazis. And the whole crowd started to take up my chant, and the cops moved the Nazis down the stairway that you see in the front of the frame. And I was leaning against the stairway. This was way before Blues Brothers was a movie. This was 15 years before. And I'm leaning on the railing, and I look at the Nazis going down, and I make a spitting gesture. It is in my heritage to do so and feel justified. Well, I actually did a little more spitting than I thought I would, and the wind was blowing, and it was the summer, and the summer uniform for Chicago police is a short-sleeved shirt. So I ended up spitting on a cop. Well, the next thing that happens is the Nazis are gone, and there's all these cops, and there's just this one skinny kid who just spit on a cop. So they got to do something. So they took the kid to jail. Well, I grew up in Chicago. So most kids are used to seeing sports activity on television. When you're a kid in Chicago, what you see on television is some guy in a sport coat and tie and hat shielding his face from the cameras. He's being taken away to jail for something because he's a mob guy. So they're always holding their coat over their face. So as the cops are taking me to the car for spitting on a cop, all the news guys who were there to photograph the Nazis decided to photograph this kid being taken to the car. So they're walking backwards, photographing me with their 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter IMOs, and I'm walking forward because the cops are schlepping me. So I hold my jacket up in front of my face. I felt like Al Capone. I mean, it was the greatest moment of my life until they put me in the elevator. When I was a skinny kid, if I weighed 130 pounds, I think I'd get an award. And I figure everybody in Chicago Police Department knows I spit on a cop, so they're going to kill me. So I get in the elevator, and I see there's nobody in the elevator but this really old guy controlling the elevator, a 90-year-old cop in uniform. Okay, fine, he's working out his pension. He's not going to hurt me. So they're taking me up about the fourth floor. A guy gets on. Now, I'm not exaggerating. Easily weighed 600 pounds. Easily was 18 feet tall. But I said right away, I started saying, look, I didn't spit on the cop. The wind was blowing. The guy looked at me. I don't know what you're talking about. Shut up, kid. I'll kill you. So they put me in a cell all by myself, I guess to protect me. And I don't know, an hour later, my father showed up and bailed me out, and that was the end of that. Oh, wait a minute. So I had to go to court because I was in trouble for spitting on a cop. So my father takes me to court and says to the judge, whose name is Epstein or something, my father says, this is my son, and we're from Chicago, and he's Jewish, and he was so offended by the Nazis. And the judge says, Green, is your daughter, are you related to, I won't say the rest of the name, and yes. And so there was a judge who knew my aunt. And on that basis alone, I was released on my own recognizance because I had to be a nice guy, pissed off at the Nazis. Of course I was. So I was innocent. That's what this picture reminds me of. Now we will go back to talking about the movie. And I'd like to point out to you that if you look to the left of Picasso in this shot, you can see glass in the corner of this building. That glass is very important. Keep your eye on that glass and the police car. Here we go. Okay, so this is the Richard J. Daley building. In Chicago, Richard J. Daley is thought of as God adjacent, or was at the time. And there was a lot of resistance to us doing this. And then they finally said, we'll only let you do this if you put the glass back right away. Well, to put glass back that size, you need glaziers. That's their job. It's a big piece of glass. You have to pre-order the glass. You have to have the guys ready to take out the pieces of the broken and install the new. Which was all fine. We're a movie company. We're willing to pay, except the city wouldn't let us do this work around Daley Plaza, God adjacent Daley Plaza. They wouldn't let us do it unless we did it over the Memorial Day weekend, the 3 days when Chicago downtown was closed, and we could do this without killing people. So we go to the glaziers and say, we're doing it on Memorial Day. And the glaziers say, we can't do it on Memorial Day because we fought for 15, 20 years to get Memorial Day off as a holiday. And this is the first holiday for the new contract. And if we take that Memorial Day off, then we'll look like fools and so on and so forth. So we ended up having to pay 7 glaziers to sit in a truck for 2 hours before, in case we got there early, at triple time. So we were paying 21 glaziers an hour until we broke the window. And I couldn't get John to break the window any faster than we broke it. So they were there for a bunch more hours. And then however long it took for them to fix the window. It was ungodly expensive to do this. But the funny thing is, when we finally showed this to the 50 ward aldermen and the mayor of the city of Chicago as a finished movie a week before it was going to be in the theaters, somebody stood up, one of the aldermen stood up and said, I've never seen anything so offensive in my life. You cannot do that to the Richard J. Daley building. The man is a saint, and I will not permit this movie to be shot and photographed the way you're depicting it. Now, he's a politician, and there's a lot I don't know about politics, but he certainly didn't understand that he was looking at a release print, and so were going to be millions of other people 7 days later because the movie was already done. He was trying to give a prohibition against doing something that happened 18 months ago. So, onward. Okay, now what's going to happen is you're going to see a car that one guy worked on for months and months and months to make it do what it's about to do. And we shot this shot, and we went home, and then they brought in the other car on a car carrier, and we replaced it exactly after these wheels had been marked with chalk so we could tow this car out or drive this car out of the way and hand place the other car in position so you could see the following shot take place. I should point out that this is the real City Hall. And it is, if you look at the light fixtures and the cove ceiling and so on, that'd be very, very expensive to build. Those are our extras. The reason we're here is, while we were shooting, and it was routine for me to be in Chicago and shooting with all those cars that you saw and have 100 police officers. We had 100 police and 100 PAs when we were in Lower Wacker, but 100 police officers was routine. And then they said the Pope is coming to visit Chicago, which is the second largest Polish population outside of Warsaw. This was when the Pope was Polish. So the police said to us, we love you guys, but you can't have any cops, because if we give you 100 cops and somebody hurts the Pope and we didn't have enough police because they were playing with a movie company, we'll get yelled at. So you guys have to find something to do where we don't need any police. Well, what's better than to run around, make fools out of ourselves in City Hall? So we had one cop to make sure that nobody came in to blow up the place, and we ran around. And that's how we had. That's how we were inside a city hall that day and had no police. As a joke, to show you the size of the movie, I couldn't do a joke like this today. I had 3 Jewish guys dressed up as the Pope and 2 archbishops. I had 2 big fancy white Cadillacs, and I come running up to Landis. John, the Pope is here in City Hall. He heard you're making a movie. He wants to see you. So John didn't believe me for 2 seconds, but walked along to see what was going on. And he and I and Bob Brown walked out there. And there's my fake Jewish Pope and my 2 fake Jewish archbishops. And we had a laugh, and everybody took regular pictures instead of selfies. And the fake Pope sat around for a while, and then he left. And that's what we did to amuse ourselves because we couldn't go outside. If you look right along the middle of the frame, horizontally across the street, you can see hundreds and hundreds of people watching a movie being made. But you get away with it because there's so much ruckus, they think it looks like they're watching the ruckus. Now, what you're seeing is the beginning of a cadre of World War II reenactors, military fans, guys that like to dress up in uniform and yell and holler. But the interesting thing was they're all regular people without a real war to fight, so it didn't look very scary or theatrical. So in order to keep with the mounting tension, the vortex of creative force, I had to chastise them and say, are you men or are you mice? Do you want to, and so on and so forth, and all the Marine BS that you need to motivate people when they don't feel like being motivated, and you get the results that you're about to see. The soldiers now shoot up the door, and the way that works is they fire their guns at fire blanks, and the door is got squibs in it, like you saw on the ground with the police car driving by and the machine gun fire chasing it. And the squibs are put in the door, and then the door is painted over. But the trouble is the door was painted over with a very heavy material, and when the squibs blew, it blew the very heavy material into the faces of the stuntmen that were standing close to it. And stuntmen and extras got hurt as a consequence of this. Nobody died, but it was painful, and guys got hurt, and it wasn't good. Just one of the things that happens sometimes. We went to shoot in the same Joliet prison that you saw us do the exterior in. The plan was to come back at the end of the movie and do these interiors, but the assistant warden that had taken us around in the location scouting was working in the prison while we were making the movie in Chicago and then back on the stage at Universal, and she got stabbed in the prison.
What?
By the prisoners.
Wow.
Killed?
Dead. I have people in the room listening, so apparently this is drawing some attention. So we made a decision not to shoot after the stabbing in the prison of the warden. So we asked John Lloyd to build the same set that we wanted for us on the stage at Universal, which of course didn't thrill him because we were building lots and lots of stuff. We were working John real hard, but this is, again, John Lloyd's work, and it's magnificent. If I didn't tell you, you'd think you were in a nice-looking prison.